Thomas Jefferson was a crucial figure during the initial creation of the United States. He has played a large role in shaping the nation, from drafting the Declaration of Independence in 1775
to his political advocacy in the 1790s as the leader of the Democratic Republican Party. Jefferson was perhaps best known for his political ideology, Jeffersonian democracy, which evolved around a belief in a small government
and an agrarian vision for the United States. Jefferson's political views won him the presidential election of 1800 against his Federalist rival, John Adams,
and carried him through 2 terms as President of the nation. As President, Jefferson was required to address Congress yearly, as stated by Article 2 of the Constitution, and thus gave his 1806 State of the Union address to inform Congress about the major events of the year. Jefferson began by addressing a foreign incident with Spain over areas along the Mississippi that the United States had gained as a result of the Louisiana Purchase. This international affair was triggered by the explorers on the Red River expedition, led by Thomas Freeman, who were forced to return from their journey early after being confronted by Spanish soldiers. This action resulted in political humiliation for Jefferson's administration and increased tensions with Spain, but also uncovered a hidden conspiracy plot.
Jefferson wrote that a great number of private individuals were combining together to carry on a military expedition against the territories of Spain. He was referring to the Burr Conspiracy, a plot carried out by Aaron Burr and General James Wilkinson to attack and claim Spanish territory for American settlers. They had planned for the Red River explorers to create a larger conflict, which would have led to a war with Spain.
After learning of this plot from Wilkinson, Jefferson immediately took action, seizing the supplies of Burr's troops, and advised Congress in this address that
active and unauthorized hostilities should be promptly and efficaciously suppressed. His supportive action against these organizers was a contrast to his opinion during the 1780s, during which he wrote that a little rebellion now and then is a good thing, and is necessary in the political world as storms in the physical, in a letter to James Madison.
In the past, Jefferson expressed his support of rebellions, but when faced with Burr's conspiracy as president, he made the practical decision to dismantle it, echoing the decisions of George Washington during the Whiskey Rebellions in the 1790s.
In regards to the question of military action, Jefferson wrote, whether it will be necessary to enlarge our regular forces will depend on the result of our negotiations with Spain, but as it is uncertain when that result will be known, the provisional measures requisite for that, and to meet any pressure intervening in that quarter, will be a subject for your early consideration.
Jefferson was clearly reluctant to engage in military actions. He had spent a lot of time downsizing the nation's army and navy, and rearming the forces would cost a lot of money, nullifying his efforts at decreasing the national debt. These military cuts, along with the recently ended Tripolitane War, weakened the nation's forces. The United States could not afford a war with Spain. He left much of the decision in the hands of Congress, as they alone held the power to declare war.
This was unlike the actions he took during the Tripolitane War, during which Jefferson sent a squadron of ships to the Mediterranean, prior to requesting an official declaration of war from Congress. Jefferson understood that military action was a risky maneuver, and involved Congress in the matter to share the responsibility if the situation became controversial.
Jefferson also subtly brings up the issue of slavery later in the document.
He praises American citizens on nearing the point where they can end the violation of human rights which had been so long continued on the unoffending inhabitants of Africa. Here Jefferson is directly referring to the Constitution, which stated that Congress could not pass any legislature on the slave trade prior to 1808, a provision that Southern states required to ratify the Constitution. Despite being a Virginian slave owner, Jefferson was always a strong opponent against slavery. One of his early drafts of the Declaration of Independence listed slavery as one of the crimes King George III had committed.
However, he only briefly wrote about the topic during this address, disguising it between other subjects, like national debt, and only subtly referred to slaves through his mentioning of the unoffending inhabitants of Africa. Jefferson did not openly criticize slave owners, as he realized he would alienate his support in the South, and instead congratulated the nation as a whole on a decision that had not yet been made, stating that stopping the trade would be morally right and would improve the reputation of the nation. Since Jefferson mentioned that a virtuous and moral people would stop the slave trade, he essentially implied that slave owners were corrupt and immoral. He was not confrontational. He was trying to build up support in Congress regarding the topic so that the banning of the slave trade would pass in 1808 when it was constitutionally legal to do so. Towards the end of the address, Jefferson discussed the national debt and taxation within the nation. One of his long-term goals as president was to lower the national debt of the nation. By doing so, he would be decreasing the power of the federal government, fulfilling his preference for a smaller government. He also wrote about taxation, which Jefferson personally was not an advocate of, but deemed necessary to decrease the debt. Jefferson tried to persuade the Congress to renew the Mediterranean Fund, which had paid for the Tripolitan Wars for a short period of time, while removing the tax on salt.
He wrote that, on a few articles of more general and necessary use, the suppression in due season will doubtless be right, but the great mass of articles on which impost is paid are foreign luxuries, purchased by only those who are rich enough to afford themselves the use of them.
Jefferson had no qualms taxing luxury items, which the rich had to pay, and was concerned with removing taxes that applied to the average independent American farmer. To him, having the rich pay more taxes was fair, even though by doing so he himself would be affected by higher taxation. Items that were necessary did not need to be taxed.
The payment of taxes for higher-end luxuries would cover that cost. He also tried to persuade Congress that the accumulation of monies in the Treasury beyond the installments of public debt should be used to fund public infrastructure and education.
Jefferson's attempt at decreasing the public debt was so successful that it accumulated surplus money in the national treasury, which he felt was best spent on public work projects. Ironically, Alexander Hamilton, Jefferson's long opponent, former leader of the Federalist Party, was also a strong advocate of increased national infrastructure, especially in his report on manufacturers that he wrote in the 1790s. Jefferson also recognized the unconstitutional nature of his proposals and proposed an amendment of the Constitution so that his actions were legal, clearly learning from the controversy surrounding the constitutionality of the Louisiana Purchase and the Tripolitan Wars. At the end of his State of the Union address, Jefferson wrote about the increased tensions with Europe that were created by the Napoleonic Wars.
He wrote that, but such is the situation of the nations of Europe, and such, too, the predicament in which we stand with some of them, that we cannot rely with certainty on the present aspect of our affairs. By 1806, the neutrality that the United States had maintained during the onset of the war when trading with both France and Britain had begun to disappear, as American sailors were forced into impressment and merchant ships were stopped.
He recognized the precarious situation that the United States was in, since the nation's policy of neutrality made foreign affairs unclear. Jefferson was warning Congress to begin to take preemptive action in the fortification of the country's defenses,
but called for a militia so organized that its effective portions could be called to any point in the Union.
He recognized that a larger federal army could be needed, but did not call for the enlargement of the army, as he thought that it was not necessary yet. Jefferson did not want to engage in a war with European powers, and instead advised Congress to wait out the conflict as long as the nation could, but suggested beginning defensive preparations, as a strong start could contribute to victory. By leaving the largest aspect of the decision to Congress, Jefferson was recognizing their strength within the federal government, ensuring a better working relationship. This would leave Congress amicable towards Jefferson's other suggestions, and would guarantee him support when they discussed the more controversial policies he recommended.